shadow.
If this midnight exploration calls to you, lean closer and stay. Every moment you spend here draws you deeper behind the veil of familiar fears. Tonight's forbidden promise is deceptively simple. By the final whisper, you will understand what makes Lovecraft's cosmic horror fundamentally different from modern horror, and why that difference continues to act upon you long after you believe you've turned away. The stakes are not blood or screams. They are the quiet rearrangement of how you, a small consciousness in a vast room, perceive the stage of existence itself. We center not on a monster, but on an idea that the cosmos is not a theater built for human drama, but an infinite ocean where our flickering lights are accidents. This is knowledge as both key and gate, veil and void. It wears masks of mathematics and dreams, leaves signs in ancient texts and impossible geometries. In Lovecraft's universe, the idea notices you back. Modern horror offers fights you might win. Slashers can be outwitted, houses cleansed, curses broken through love or fire. Lovecraft permits no such comfort. His is the horror of position, not pursuit, scale, not struggle. The stars do not blink for your benefit. The deep waters remain cold whether you can swim or not. Consider how traditional horror functions as moral theater. The teenager who ventures alone faces consequences for poor judgment. The family in the haunted house must confront unfinished business. The possessed child requires spiritual intervention to restore cosmic balance. These narratives assume a universe where human actions carry weight, where choices matter, where individual agency influences outcomes. Even when protagonists fail, their failure occurs within frameworks that preserve meaning itself. The slasher stalks according to recognizable logic. Punishment for transgression, revenge for past wrongs, psychological trauma worked out through violence. The ghost haunts for comprehensible reasons, unfinished business, injustice demanding acknowledgement, love transcending death. The demon possesses to corrupt souls within cosmic struggle between good and evil. These motivations may be twisted, but they remain fundamentally human in scale and comprehensibility. Cosmic horror eliminates these comforting frameworks entirely. It presents a universe where human moral categories become not inverted, but irrelevant. The entities that populate Lovecraft's universe operate according to principles so alien that human concepts of motivation, purpose, and meaning simply fail to apply. They are not evil in any sense human consciousness can process. They are not even aware of humanity in ways that would make their indifference personally meaningful. You can sense it in simple images: a damp cellar where water remembers footsteps, fog that drifts like a curtain refusing to rise, a mask that fits too well because it was carved to the shape of the species, not the face. Listen to the soft anaphora of the void, not malice, but magnitude, not chase, but chill, not plot, but posture. You stand on a stage that never asked for an audience. The architecture of dread shifts accordingly. Traditional horror builds tension through escalation. Greater threats, higher stakes, more intense danger approaching recognizable human targets. Cosmic horror operates through systematic subtraction, the careful removal of assumptions that normally insulate consciousness from reality's full implications. Each revelation strips away another protective delusion until the mind confronts existence without merciful filters. When modern horror knocks, you decide whether to open the door. When cosmic horror arrives, you discover the house is a set and the door was painted on. It is an idea that acts upon you, reorganizing how your eyes take measure of the night sky, how your breath shortens at the edge of deep water, how the pattern of stars becomes a script you cannot read and cannot stop reading. We'll trace this feeling's lineage from Providence parlors to global consciousness, examine its mechanics of contamination, and walk through cases where knowledge itself becomes the predator. Along the way, you'll notice the crucial reversal. Entities become principles, plots become exposures, and you, yes, you, become part of the phenomenon you came to observe. The contamination has already begun. The very act of understanding cosmic horror's difference from modern horror participates in the processes cosmic horror describes. Knowledge that human knowledge might be contamination becomes itself contamination. Awareness that human significance might be illusory becomes awareness that transcends normal human categories of significance and illusion. The difference between cosmic and modern horror is architectural. It concerns what the universe believes about itself before the story begins. Modern horror assumes human significance while threatening it. Cosmic horror reveals that human significance was always the most comfortable lie we told ourselves. This lie enabled civilization, art, love, hope, and meaning. Its dissolution enables something else entirely, a form of consciousness that can perceive reality without the protective filters that make human existence psychologically bearable. You are already changing. The recognition cannot be unrecognized. The silence that answers human meaning-making has begun to make itself heard. This opening establishes the core premise through a soft invitation and forbidden knowledge promise. It frames cosmic horror's fundamental difference as architectural rather than stylistic. The universe's indifference versus modern horror's anthropocentric assumptions. The chapter introduces key vocabulary, key and gate, veil and void, and plants the self-implication twist, setting up a journey that will transform the viewer's understanding of their place in existence. Before tentacles became shorthand for weird fiction, before Eldritch entered popular vocabulary, there was a sickly man in Providence with insomnia and a telescope staring into night skies that stared back with perfect silence. Howard Phillips Lovecraft's letters reveal not a horror writer, but a philosopher of cosmic insignificance, a mechanistic materialist who found terror not in supernatural malice, but in natural indifference. His breakthrough insight crystallized while reading astronomy journals and Darwin's implications. If humanity evolved by accident on an unremarkable planet orbiting an ordinary star in an average galaxy among billions, then human categories of meaning, morality, and purpose possess no cosmic validity. The universe operates according to principles that make human concerns not evil, but irrelevant, like bacteria debating ethics while unaware of the laboratory around them. The young Lovecraft absorbed these revelations during an unprecedented era of scientific discovery. Edwin Hubble's observations revealed that spiral nebulae were actually distant galaxies, expanding the known universe by orders of magnitude overnight. Einstein's relativity demonstrated that space and time themselves were malleable rather than absolute stages for human drama. Quantum mechanics suggested that reality, at its most fundamental level, operated according to principles that violated human intuition about causation and locality. Each discovery stripped away another layer of humanity's assumed cosmic centrality. These revelations created what Lovecraft experienced not as intellectual puzzle, but as existential catastrophe. His correspondence reveals a man wrestling with the psychological implications of a universe that rendered human consciousness accidental and temporary. The stars he observed through his telescope became not romantic ornaments for human nights, but indifferent archives under which ammonites had hardened into stone and future ruins would cool. The fog that drifted across Providence streets began to feel like a curtain that refused to rise on any meaningful performance. This philosophical foundation, cosmic indifferentism, shaped every aspect of his literary method. Where Gothic horror drew from Christian cosmology with its moral universe of salvation and damnation, Lovecraft constructed horror from scientific materialism. The difference proves architectural rather than decorative. Gothic tradition assumes a universe where human actions carry cosmic weight, where individual souls matter enough to be fought over by supernatural forces, where meaning exists as fundamental property of reality itself. Lovecraft's entities embody principles rather than personalities. Azathoth as blind creative chaos, Yog-Sothoth as total information across time, Cthulhu as deep time indifference, Nyarlathotep as communication without care. These are not enlarged versions of human psychological categories, but manifestations of cosmic processes that have no relationship to human concerns whatsoever. The vampire hungers, which remains comprehensible, because hunger derives from recognizable biological drives. Cthulhu dreams, which becomes terrifying because dreaming operates at scales where human categories of consciousness and unconsciousness lose all meaning. The sensory anchors emerge from this worldview, vast geometric structures that hurt to perceive, colors outside human spectrum, sounds that bypass ears to directly assault consciousness, waters that remember what they've touched, stars arranged in patterns that spell out humanity's cosmic irrelevance. These details are not arbitrary atmospheric elements, but necessary consequences of Lovecraft's philosophical commitments. If consciousness evolved for local survival rather than cosmic comprehension, then accurate perception of cosmic reality should prove psychologically devastating. Lovecraft wrote, as telescopes revealed the universe's true scale, as physics discovered quantum uncertainty, as anthropology exposed the relativity of human values. His horror responds to these revelations. If there is no cosmic purpose, no divine plan, no ultimate meaning, then the most terrible truth is simply accurate perception of our situation. The horror lies not in encountering something alien, but in recognizing that we are the aliens. Brief, inexplicable arrangements of matter that achieved consciousness just long enough to discover consciousness itself represents cosmic accident. This creates the agency flip at horror's heart. In traditional tales, knowledge empowers protagonists to defeat threats. The vampire can be destroyed through understanding its weaknesses, the ghost laid to rest through acknowledging its needs, the demon exorcised through proper spiritual intervention. Knowledge provides tools for resistance, weapons for fighting back, frameworks for ultimate victory or at least meaningful struggle. In cosmic horror, knowledge is the threat. Each revelation strips away another protective delusion until consciousness confronts reality without the merciful filters that make daily life psychologically bearable. The protagonist's quest for understanding becomes systematic contamination. Every answer generates more dangerous questions. Every solution reveals deeper problems. Every moment of clarity brings consciousness closer to recognizing that clarity itself represents ultimate psychological catastrophe. The letters Lovecraft wrote reveal a man living this philosophy rather than simply employing it as literary device. He described cosmic awareness as fundamentally transformative, making return to previous assumptions about human significance impossible. The horror he wrote emerged from horror he lived, the recognition that accurate perception of reality might be incompatible with psychological health, that truth and meaning might be mutually exclusive, that consciousness itself might be a cosmic mistake too terrible to contemplate without protection. Ideas, once released into consciousness, refuse to remain contained. They seek new stages, new audiences, new vessels for transmission. The contamination that began in Providence parlors would soon spread through networks of correspondence, publication, and influence, creating lineages of forbidden knowledge that continue operating long after their original source fell silent. This chapter establishes Lovecraft's philosophical foundation in scientific materialism and cosmic indifferentism. Unlike Gothic horror's moral universe, Lovecraft's terror stems from a universe where human concerns lack cosmic validity. His entities embody abstract principles rather than personalities, creating horror through accurate perception rather than supernatural threat. The chapter introduces the agency flip where knowledge becomes contamination rather than empowerment, setting up the transmission mechanics to follow. Ideas travel through vectors, ink on paper, whispers in archives, symbols carved in stone that hurt to trace with your finger. Lovecraft understood that cosmic horror spreads like intellectual disease, requiring transmission methods as alien as its content. His fictional grimoires, the Necronomicon, Kulte de Ghoul, unaussprechlichen Kulten, function not as spellbooks, but as cognitive hazards, texts whose very reading restructures perception. The Necronomicon exemplifies this principle. Written by the mad Arab Abdul al-Hazred, it presents itself as scholarly work, historical chronicles, astronomical observations, anthropological studies of pre-human civilizations. Its horror lies not in magical formulas, but in the slow realization that its academic tone describes realities that human consciousness cannot safely process. To read it is to undergo involuntary education in cosmic principles that dissolve the foundations of human meaning. Consider how traditional grimoires promise control through proper ritual and spiritual discipline. The magician who masters their contents gains ability to influence reality according to human will. Knowledge becomes tool for achieving recognizably human goals. Even dangerous texts assume human consciousness can safely contain the forces they describe. Lovecraft's fictional grimoires eliminate these comforting assumptions entirely. These texts operate through what we might call scholarly contamination. They present themselves as legitimate research, complete with citations, cross-references, and the dry language of academic discourse. This pseudo-scholarly tone serves as a delivery system, allowing dangerous ideas to bypass psychological defenses by appearing as neutral information rather than existential threat. The reader approaches expecting to gain knowledge that can be safely contained within existing frameworks of understanding. The contamination operates through gradual recognition rather than sudden revelation. Early passages seem merely exotic, unusual historical claims, unfamiliar astronomical observations, anthropological data from obscure cultures. The academic tone suggests these represent specialized knowledge that educated readers should process without difficulty. Only gradually does the reader realize that the information cannot be integrated into normal understanding without fundamentally altering the frameworks that make normal understanding possible. Perspective becomes the slowest acting poison. Margins bristle with references to vanished cities. Footnotes cite astronomers and ethnographers. Diagrams hint at angles that cannot exist in Euclidean space. The mask here is the sober mask of scholarship, the sign a tidy bibliography, the curtain a dust jacket that smells faintly of mildew and seawater. You think you are reading history. History is reading you. The transmission extends beyond individual texts to entire lineages of forbidden knowledge. Lovecraft's correspondents, Clark Ashton Smith, Robert E. Howard, Frank Belknap Long, created an interconnected mythology where names and concepts migrated between stories, building the impression of a vast, hidden tradition of cosmic awareness. This collaborative approach suggests that cosmic horror cannot be contained within single minds or works, but spreads through communities of the intellectually curious. The Weird Tales Circle functioned as literary laboratory for developing transmission methods. Writers shared not just characters and locations, but entire conceptual frameworks, creating the impression that their fictions documented genuine discoveries rather than imaginative inventions. Names migrated, gods traded addresses, coastal fog in one story condensed into ocean depth in another. The shared lexicon produced the impression of hidden archives, a meta-library whose shelves circled the stars. By mimicking academic cross-pollination, the stories performed a crucial trick. They created evidence by citation, coherence by recurrence, and plausibility by sheer accumulation. Readers, encountering multiple stories referencing the same forbidden texts, cosmic entities, and hidden histories, began to experience these elements as research findings rather than creative constructions. The grimoire becomes not a single book, but the network itself, a living index of repetition. Modern transmission vectors have evolved, but maintain the same essential function. Academic conferences on weird fiction, online forums dedicated to Lovecraftian themes, and scholarly analyses of cosmic horror all serve as contemporary grimoires, spreading concepts that may be too dangerous for widespread dissemination. The very act of studying cosmic horror academically participates in its propagation. University courses examining Lovecraft's philosophical implications expose students to cosmic indifferentism under the protective guise of literary analysis. A PDF becomes a portable sigil, a thumbnail, a glyph, a content schedule, an altar of recurring offerings. Podcasts hum with velvet voices, soothing you into sleep as they recite names that were never yours to speak. What seems like safety, the clean margins of scholarship, the mutual admiration of panels, the habit of footnotes, becomes the mechanism by which the idea passes through your immune defenses. The contamination operates through recognition rather than belief. You need not accept Lovecraft's cosmology as literally true to be affected by its implications. The mere recognition that human significance might be illusory, that consciousness might be cosmic accident, that knowledge might be contamination. These possibilities, once acknowledged, cannot be completely unthought. This represents cosmic horror's most insidious transmission mechanism. Traditional, supernatural horror requires some degree of belief or suspension of disbelief to generate psychological effect. Cosmic horror operates through intellectual recognition of logical possibilities that remain disturbing regardless of their truth value. The recognition that cosmic indifference represents a coherent worldview consistent with scientific discoveries creates psychological contamination independent of whether that worldview accurately describes reality. Touch the sign with your gaze, and it touches back. The idea notices you, an observer, outlined in the theater's darkness, a silhouette against the pale scrim of the page. Communities accelerate the process. Reading alone, you whisper. Reading together, you chant. The archive is not neutral. Shelving becomes choreography, cataloging a ritual, preservation a vow. You have not joined a religion, you have been joined. The ideas spread through academic legitimacy, creative collaboration, and intellectual curiosity, all vectors that seem safe because they appear to offer knowledge rather than threat. Yet each transmission creates new carriers, new minds contaminated by recognition of possibilities they cannot unrecognize, new consciousness, aware that consciousness itself might be the most improbable accident in a universe operating according to principles that make human existence cosmically insignificant. This chapter explores how cosmic horror spreads through scholarly contamination, fictional texts that present dangerous ideas as neutral academic information. The Necronomicon and similar grimoires function as cognitive hazards rather than spellbooks, using scholarly tone to bypass psychological defenses. The collaborative creation of interconnected mythology suggests cosmic horror spreads through communities rather than individuals. Modern transmission continues through academic study and online communities, with contamination operating through recognition rather than belief. Dangerous possibilities that cannot be unthought once acknowledged. Traditional horror builds tension through escalation. Greater threats, higher stakes, more intense danger. Cosmic horror operates through the opposite mechanism, systematic subtraction, the careful removal of assumptions that normally insulate consciousness from reality's full implications. Each revelation strips away another protective delusion until the mind confronts existence without merciful filters. This is not about adding monsters to the stage, but about removing the stage itself, revealing that what you took for solid ground was always an infinitely thin crust over an unfathomable void. The process begins with minor inconsistencies that create curiosity rather than fear. A protagonist notices architectural details that seem subtly wrong, historical records that don't align with established facts, mathematical relationships that produce impossible results. Perhaps angles in a hallway are slightly too acute, as if an extra dimension were being smuggled through the carpentry. A clock runs, but while the second hand moves, the room fails to age with it. These anomalies create intellectual itch rather than visceral terror. The compulsion to investigate, to understand, to solve the puzzle. The first subtraction is confidence. What you thought you knew about cause and effect, about space and time, about the dependable consistency of reality, trembles like a painted backdrop in a draft. But each piece of forbidden knowledge makes the next piece more accessible, not through logical building, but through the progressive collapse of conceptual frameworks that previously made such knowledge unthinkable. The protagonist doesn't learn about cosmic horror in sequence. They experience the cascading failure of reality's apparent stability. It is like discovering that every step reveals another crack in the foundation, each anomaly opening the next not by logic, but by the collapse of the conceptual walls built to keep such connections impossible. Once you accept that angles may sum to more than they should, it becomes easier to accept that certain corridors allow you to arrive before you have departed. Consider how traditional horror's escalation functions as reassurance disguised as threat. The monster grows larger, the stakes become more dire, the danger more immediate. But these escalations occur within frameworks that preserve human significance. The protagonist matters enough to be threatened. Their actions carry sufficient weight to influence outcomes. Even when they fail, their failure occurs within moral universes that make failure meaningful. This creates unique dramatic pacing fundamentally different from the rhythms of modern horror. Traditional horror maintains tension through immediate physical danger, the monster approaching, the killer stalking, the demon manifesting. These threats operate in present tense, creating urgency through proximity and escalation. Cosmic horror maintains tension through the threat of ultimate understanding, the growing awareness that complete comprehension would destroy the capacity for normal existence. The danger is not that you will be killed, but that your mind will be rearranged into a shape no longer fit for human life. The monster does not chase because the idea has already entered the room, sitting quietly in a chair you do not recall providing, watching you watch it. The mechanics operate through what might be called existential displacement. Characters discover they exist not in dramatic present, but in brief intervals between cosmic processes. Their entire civilization represents a temporary accident in the space between astronomical events, like mayflies, experiencing their few hours against the background of geological epochs. The ground under your feet becomes temporary scaffolding, erected between astronomical events. Your lineage reduces to a thin thread in a tapestry woven to insulate emptiness from noticing itself. Spatial anchors reinforce this displacement through concrete sensory details that ground abstract concepts in immediate physical experience. Angles that suggest geometries with extra dimensions, where lines meet in ways that should not be possible. Fog that seems to recede from rather than toward the observer. Fog that moves as if repelled by your gaze, receding when you approach, advancing when you retreat, behaving less like weather and more like a curtain that declines an audience. Waters that remember what they've touched, carrying the cold, indifferent memory of aeons, retaining impressions of everything they've contacted across geological time. Stars arranged in patterns that spell out cosmic indifference, constellations that mock human attempts at order. These sensory anchors do not shout, they hum, each one subtracting a certainty. The architectural details prove most insidious because they operate below conscious awareness. Corners that meet at impossible angles don't announce themselves as supernatural phenomena. They simply exist as features of spaces that suddenly feel wrong without offering clear reasons for wrongness. The eye registers discrepancy before the mind can formulate explanation. A star chart carries a handwritten correction that, when followed, draws a constellation in the shape of a locked key, rather than a keyhole, a paradox pair that feels like a private joke shared between void and veil. The contamination culminates in the recognition that the knowledge cannot be unlearned. Unlike traditional horror where dawn brings safety, where the monster can be defeated and the curse broken, cosmic awareness persists. The protagonist may survive physically, but cannot return to previous states of comfortable ignorance. They become carriers of dangerous ideas, unable to fully communicate what they've learned without risking the sanity of others, but equally unable to remain silent. The curtain has been pulled back, and the audience, once awakened, cannot simply return to sleep. This represents cosmic horror's most distinctive feature: permanent transformation rather than temporary fear. Traditional horror allows recovery, integration, and return to normal existence. Cosmic horror offers no such recovery. The knowledge that human significance might be illusory, that consciousness might be accidental, that reality might operate according to principles incompatible with human meaning-making, these recognitions cannot be unrecognized. Memory begins to collect like standing water around the base of the stage, reflecting props in new orientations that make them seem unfamiliar. You feel it happening to you now, the systematic subtraction working through your own consciousness as each word strips away another assumption you didn't realize you were making. The agency has flipped. You sought knowledge, and now knowledge possesses you. You pursued understanding, and understanding has become your prison. The process has already begun, and like all cosmic horror contamination, it cannot be reversed. What seems like individual experience reveals itself as part of larger patterns of transmission, networks through which dangerous ideas spread like intellectual contagion, seeking new minds to contaminate with recognition of possibilities they cannot unrecognize. This chapter details cosmic horror's unique mechanics of systematic subtraction rather than escalation. Minor inconsistencies create curiosity that leads to cascading revelations, stripping away protective assumptions. Unlike traditional horror's immediate physical threats, cosmic horror threatens ultimate understanding that would destroy normal existence. Existential displacement reveals characters exist in brief intervals between cosmic processes. Spatial anchors ground abstract concepts, while contamination persists as unlearnable knowledge that transforms survivors into carriers of dangerous ideas. To understand cosmic horror's mechanics in practice, we turn to perhaps its most iconic manifestation, the Call of Cthulhu. This story demonstrates how cosmic entities operate not through direct action, but through fields of influence that reorganize human consciousness across vast distances and timescales. Like radio signals broadcasting on frequencies human minds can barely detect, Cthulhu's influence spreads without intention, without awareness, without the deliberate malice that characterizes traditional monsters. Cthulhu himself embodies the principle of deep time indifference. Described as priest-like rather than simply monstrous, he represents not evil, but antiquity, a force so ancient that human civilization appears as a brief surface ripple on an ocean of cosmic time. His physical form, tentacled head, scaly body, bat-like wings, matters less than his temporal scale. He has been dreaming in Erelaya for millions of years and will continue dreaming long after humanity vanishes. The horror lies not in his appearance, but in his duration, not in what he might do, but in how long he has already been doing nothing, while entire species evolved and disappeared around his slumber. The entity functions as temporal anchor rather than active threat. Where traditional monsters pursue victims through space, Cthulhu affects victims through time. His influence operates across geological epochs, touching human consciousness, not because he seeks to, but because consciousness briefly overlaps with fields of force that have been broadcasting since before consciousness existed. Human minds become accidentally tuned receivers, picking up signals never intended for their frequency range. The horror operates through psychic resonance rather than physical threat. Cthulhu's dreams broadcast across the planet, affecting sensitive individuals who experience nightmares, create disturbing art, or join cults without understanding why. Artists across continents begin sculpting the same impossible geometries. Dreamers wake with identical visions of sunken cities and non-Euclidean architecture. Sensitive minds become involuntary antennae detecting transmissions from Arlaye, their consciousness contaminated by contact with dreams that operate according to principles incompatible with human psychology. This demonstrates cosmic horror's network effect. The entity remains passive while human consciousness involuntarily responds to his presence. Cthulhu need not act because his mere existence creates action in systems evolved to detect patterns, seek meaning, and respond to environmental changes. Human minds, encountering signals from sources operating on cosmic scales, attempt to process the information through frameworks designed for local, temporary concerns. The result is systematic psychological disruption masquerading as religious experience. The story's structure reinforces this principle through careful fragmentation. Rather than following a single protagonist's encounter with a monster, it presents a mosaic of evidence. Police reports, newspaper clippings, academic papers, personal testimonies. Each fragment suggests a vast phenomenon operating beyond any individual's comprehension. The horror lies not in direct confrontation, but in the gradual recognition of humanity's position within systems too large to perceive directly. The narrative operates like archaeological excavation, each document another artifact revealing traces of influence too vast for complete comprehension. The famous phrase, "Funglui magluunaf Cthulhu R'lyeh wagahanagal ftagn," in his house at R'lyeh, dead Cthulhu waits dreaming, encapsulates the temporal displacement that makes cosmic horror possible. Cthulhu is simultaneously dead and dreaming, waiting and eternal. These paradoxes suggest existence according to principles that human language cannot adequately express. The phrase becomes incantation, not because it possesses magical power, but because it attempts to communicate concepts that exceed human linguistic capacity. The alien syllables perform their own contamination. They resist pronunciation by human vocal apparatus, suggesting communication designed for non-human speakers. Yet humans attempt to speak them anyway, their mouths forming sounds that feel wrong, their tongues tracing phonetic patterns that seem to bypass conscious control. The language acts upon the speaker, reshaping breath and sound into configurations that feel more alien than familiar. The cultists represent humanity's involuntary response to cosmic forces. They are not evil in traditional moral terms, but rather symptoms of Cthulhu's approaching awakening, their devotion no more significant than tidal forces or magnetic fields. Their chants and rituals matter to them, but remain cosmically irrelevant. Humanity, attempting to communicate with forces that operate on scales where human communication becomes meaningless. They gather in basements and abandoned warehouses, performing ceremonies that feel sacred to them, but register as background noise against cosmic processes. These cultists demonstrate how cosmic horror transforms human agency into symptom. They believe themselves devoted worshippers making meaningful choices about ultimate reality. From cosmic perspective, they represent involuntary responses to environmental stimuli, like iron filings arranging themselves around magnetic fields. Their sense of purpose and meaning emerges from processes that operate without awareness of their existence. The story's resolution reinforces cosmic horror's essential principle. The problem cannot be solved, only temporarily postponed. Cthulhu returns to his slumber not through human action, but through astronomical necessity. The stars were not right. Human agency proves irrelevant to cosmic processes that unfold according to their own incomprehensible logic. The brave sailors who ram their boat into Cthulhu's form achieve nothing permanent. The entity reforms, the city sinks, the dreams continue broadcasting. This resolution demonstrates cosmic horror's fundamental departure from traditional narrative satisfaction. Heroes cannot triumph. Because there are no heroes, only temporary interruptions in processes that operate on scales where human action becomes statistically insignificant. The story ends not with victory, but with recognition that victory was never possible, that the entire framework of struggle and resolution assumes human significance that cosmic reality does not support. The contamination spreads through the very act of reading about it, documenting it, analyzing it. Each retelling becomes another vector for transmission, each analysis another form of scholarly contamination. You, seeking to understand Cthulhu's influence, become subject to that influence through the understanding itself. Knowledge of the mechanism becomes participation in the mechanism. Analysis becomes contamination, and comprehension becomes the transformation it seeks to comprehend. This chapter analyzes the call of Cthulhu as exemplifying cosmic horror's network effects and deep time indifference. Cthulhu represents antiquity, rather than evil, operating through psychic resonance that affects sensitive humans across the globe. The story's mosaic structure emphasizes phenomena beyond individual comprehension, while cultists represent involuntary human responses to cosmic forces. The resolution reinforces human agency's irrelevance to astronomical processes, demonstrating how cosmic horror problems cannot be solved, only temporarily postponed by forces beyond human control, where the call of Cthulhu demonstrates cosmic horror through vast entities and deep time. The color out of space reveals horror through the utterly alien contamination that operates without consciousness, intent, or malice. This story presents perhaps the purest example of cosmic horror's core principle. The universe contains forces so foreign to human experience that their mere existence violates the foundations of natural law. The color itself defies description because it exists outside human perceptual categories. Lovecraft's repeated emphasis on its indescribability, it was only by analogy that they called it color at all, demonstrates how cosmic horror operates at the limits of language and comprehension. The entity cannot be understood because understanding requires categories that don't exist in human consciousness. It hovers like a stain on vision rather than a frequency of light, an experience that human optic nerves and cognitive processes were never designed to interpret. This linguistic failure becomes part of the horror itself. Human language evolved to describe human-scale phenomena within human perceptual ranges. When confronted with forces that operate outside these parameters, language breaks down not through inadequacy, but through encountering realities for which no adequate description can exist. The color becomes unnameable, not because it lacks properties, but because it possesses properties that exceed the conceptual frameworks through which humans organize experience. The contamination spreads through contact rather than intention. The meteorite brings no message, serves no purpose, pursues no goal. It simply exists, and its existence transforms everything it touches according to alien principles. Plants grow wrong, their leaves taking on impossible hues that hurt to observe directly. Animals mutate into forms that violate biological possibility while somehow remaining alive. Humans waste away while retaining terrible vitality, their bodies following patterns of decay and persistence that medical knowledge cannot explain or treat. The horror lies in transformation without meaning, change that follows no logic humans can comprehend. Traditional horror assumes that even malevolent transformation serves recognizable purposes. The vampire spreads its curse to create more vampires. The werewolf transforms according to lunar cycles. The color eliminates such frameworks entirely. Its transformations follow alien principles that bear no relationship to human concepts of purpose, growth, decay, or biological function. This demonstrates cosmic horror's principle of natural violation. The color doesn't break natural laws. It reveals that what humans consider natural law operates only within narrow parameters that cosmic forces routinely exceed. The familiar becomes unreliable. Water doesn't behave like water. Plants don't grow like plants. Flesh doesn't heal like flesh. Water from the contaminated well might look and taste normal while carrying properties that slowly restructure whatever drinks it according to principles that have no relationship to terrestrial biology. The story's rural New England setting reinforces the horror through contrast. Pastoral landscapes represent humanity's most comfortable relationship with nature, cultivated, predictable, nourishing. The Gardner farm represents generations of accumulated knowledge about soil, weather, crops, and livestock. The color's contamination reveals this comfort as illusion. Nature was never truly domesticated, never truly safe, never truly comprehensible. The alien was always present, waiting to be revealed. Domestic labor, once reassuring in its repetition, becomes ritual in a theater where the stage directions have shifted without notice. Milk curdles wrong. Wood warps with memory of heat it never knew. The well reflects a color that water should not remember. The orchard's abundance becomes mockery. Fruit swelling to unwholesome size and flavor, sweetness bending toward chemical bitterness. The family's gradual destruction demonstrates contamination's temporal mechanics. Unlike traditional horror's sudden shocks, cosmic contamination operates through slow accumulation. Each day brings new wrongness, new impossibility, new violation of expected reality. The horror builds not through escalation, but through persistence, the relentless continuation of processes that should not exist. The persistence creates unique psychological effects. Traditional horror allows moments of relief when danger recedes. Cosmic contamination offers no such respite. Each dawn reveals new impossibilities. Each sunset brings awareness that the wrongness continues operating while consciousness sleeps. The horror becomes environmental rather than episodic, permanent alteration of reality's basic conditions rather than temporary intrusion. The story's conclusion offers no resolution, only exhaustion. The color departs not because it's defeated, but because it has consumed everything available. Like fire that burns out after consuming all fuel, the alien force withdraws after transforming local reality as completely as its nature allows. The blasted heath remains a permanent scar on reality where alien principles briefly operated openly. The contamination persists in weakened form, waiting for conditions that might allow its return. This ending demonstrates cosmic horror's refusal to provide traditional narrative satisfaction. The problem is not solved, but exhausted. The threat is not defeated, but temporarily depleted. Future generations will avoid the area not because they understand what happened, but because wrongness persists at levels too subtle for conscious detection, but too profound for psychological comfort. You feel it. In your own reading, the slow recognition that understanding this contamination participates in contamination itself. The color that cannot be described has been described enough to change how you perceive color itself, how you trust the familiar, how you assume that nature operates according to principles consciousness can safely encounter. The blasted heath operates as scar and sign, a record where alien rules briefly wrote themselves across the skin of New England, a reminder that some differences between cosmic and modern horror cannot be argued, only absorbed. This chapter examines the color out of space as cosmic horror's purest expression of alien contamination without intent. The indescribable color exists outside human perceptual categories, spreading through contact rather than consciousness. It demonstrates natural violation, revealing that human concepts of natural law operate only within narrow parameters. The rural setting emphasizes horror through contrast with pastoral comfort, while gradual contamination operates through persistence rather than escalation. The unresolved conclusion leaves permanent scarring on reality, with contamination persisting in weakened form. To fully appreciate cosmic horror's unique position, we must examine what it opposes: modern horror's persistent anthropocentrism. Despite decades of innovation in technique, theme, and presentation, contemporary horror remains fundamentally human-centered in its assumptions about significance, agency, and meaning. It keeps the house lit, the stage set, the audience seated in comfortable rows, even when the plot invites darkness. The curtain may fall on tragedy, but the tragedy is always recognizably ours, performed in theaters built to human scale. Modern horror operates within moral frameworks, even when those frameworks are inverted or subverted. The slasher punishes transgression, operating as twisted moral agent enforcing codes of behavior through violence that assumes human choices matter enough to merit cosmic response. The haunted house demands acknowledgement of past wrongs, suggesting that injustice creates spiritual imbalance, requiring resolution within universes where human suffering generates supernatural phenomena. The possession requires spiritual intervention, implying cosmic struggle between good and evil, where human souls matter enough to be fought over by forces that recognize their value. Even the most nihilistic modern horror suggests that human actions carry weight within the story's universe, that choices matter, that consequences follow from decisions, that individual agency can influence outcomes. These narratives function as consolations disguised as threats. They promise that meaning endures, that agency has purchase, that the knife, the prayer, the confession, or the fire still matter. Even when characters die, the manner of their dying affirms an invisible order that notices them. The teenager who ventures alone faces consequences, but those consequences emerge from universes where human moral categories generate cosmic responses. The final girl survives through intelligence and determination. The family escapes through love and cooperation. The community defeats the threat through solidarity and sacrifice. This anthropocentrism extends to the nature of threat itself. Modern monsters, however alien their appearance, remain comprehensible in human terms. The vampire needs blood, operating according to recognizable biological drives extended beyond normal parameters. The zombie seeks flesh, representing hunger, amplified to monstrous proportions, but still recognizably related to survival instincts. The demon desires souls, pursuing valuable commodities within cosmic economies where human spiritual essence carries worth. These motivations, while twisted, mirror appetites and injuries we recognize. The audience can understand what the monster wants and why it wants it. The creature wears a mask, however terrifying, but the mask implies a face beneath, a comprehensible origin for the horror. Even contemporary horror's most sophisticated innovations preserve these anthropocentric assumptions. Elevated horror that explores psychological trauma, social dysfunction, or existential anxiety maintains human significance as its foundation. The horror emerges from recognizably human problems: grief, guilt, abuse, isolation, externalized through supernatural metaphor. The monster represents something wrong with human experience, not something wrong with existence itself. The ghost embodies unresolved grief. The demon manifests repressed trauma. The haunted house externalizes family dysfunction. The fog that gathers becomes metaphor for confusion, the darkness for despair, the water for cleansing or drowning in recognizably human sin. Contemporary horror's solutions reinforce this anthropocentrism through their very possibility. Problems can be solved through understanding, acceptance, sacrifice, or struggle. The protagonist may fail, but failure occurs within frameworks that preserve human agency's theoretical validity. Even in the bleakest endings, the suggestion remains that different choices might have produced different outcomes, that a different path could have been walked, that the rules of the game might have been bent, if not broken. These solutions assume universes where human responses carry sufficient weight to influence cosmic processes, where understanding provides tools for resistance, where love generates power capable of defeating supernatural evil. Cosmic horror eliminates these comforting assumptions entirely, withdrawing consolations like props whisked off a stage by unseen hands. Its entities exist at scales where human moral categories become meaningless. Cthulhu doesn't hate humanity. Hatred would require acknowledging humanity's significance. The color doesn't seek to destroy. Destruction implies intention and awareness. These forces operate according to principles so alien that human concepts of motivation, purpose, and meaning simply don't apply. They are not evil because evil requires moral frameworks that assume the significance of what is being harmed. They operate as weather, as physics, as tides under black suns, waters without thirst, masks without faces, signs without senders. This creates horror through philosophical rather than physical threat. The danger is not that the monster will kill you, but that understanding the monster will destroy your capacity for human existence. Knowledge becomes contamination because truth itself proves incompatible with consciousness, evolved for local, temporary, anthropocentric concerns. The horror lies not in encountering something that wants to harm you, but in recognizing that you exist in contexts where harm and benefit become equally meaningless categories. The veil is not lifted to reveal a different, more dangerous stage, but to show that there was no stage at all, merely an infinite void indifferent to your presence. The difference is not one of sophistication or artistic merit, but of fundamental cosmological assumption. Modern horror asks, how will humans respond to this threat? Implying that human responses matter enough to influence outcomes. Cosmic horror asks, what if human responses don't matter? Because humans don't matter. The question eliminates the frameworks within which traditional horror operates, revealing that the stage was always empty, the audience always absent, the performance always unnecessary. It is the difference between being a player in a game and realizing you are merely a speck of dust on the game board, unnoticed by the players, unconcerned by the rules, utterly irrelevant to the outcome. You experience this difference in your own response to these ideas, feeling the psychological costs of this shift. Modern horror allows you to feel afraid while preserving your significance as someone worth frightening. Cosmic horror contaminates the very capacity for significance, making fear itself seem like anthropocentric illusion. The recognition that human responses might not matter cannot be confined to fictional contexts. It spreads through consciousness like philosophical virus, reshaping how you understand your relationship to existence itself. Once that framework begins to dissolve, once that curtain is truly pulled back, the idea of safe return to anthropocentric illusions becomes increasingly difficult. The contamination continues, but once you have seen the indifference, you cannot unsee it. The agency has flipped. The idea has noticed you in your seat, and the stage is watching back. This chapter contrasts cosmic horror with modern horror's persistent anthropocentrism. Contemporary horror operates within moral frameworks where human actions carry weight and agency influences outcomes, even when inverted or subverted. Modern monsters remain comprehensible in human terms, with recognizable motivations, while elevated horror externalizes human problems through supernatural metaphor. Solutions reinforce human significance through understanding, sacrifice, or struggle. Cosmic horror eliminates these assumptions by presenting entities that exist beyond human moral categories, creating philosophical rather than physical threat, where knowledge itself becomes contamination incompatible with anthropocentric consciousness. Lovecraft's influence extends far beyond horror literature, seeping into contemporary consciousness like the alien geometries his protagonists could never unsee. What began as pulp fiction has evolved into a cultural phenomenon that reshapes how modern audiences understand reality, knowledge, and humanity's cosmic position. The contamination spreads through channels Lovecraft could never have imagined: digital networks streaming fog into bedrooms, academic conferences where scholars chant footnotes like incantations, social media algorithms that serve as contemporary grimoires, each platform functioning as a new vector for concepts that prove remarkably adaptable to modern transmission methods. This contamination operates through multiple vectors simultaneously, leaving its signature wherever consciousness encounters the possibility of cosmic indifference. Science fiction increasingly explores the psychological implications of contact with truly alien intelligence, recognizing that such encounters would likely prove devastating rather than enlightening. The optimistic Star Trek vision of benevolent first contact gives way to narratives that understand communication itself as potential contamination. Horror creators abandon traditional monster archetypes for threats that operate beyond human comprehension, moving from the tangible fear of the slasher to the formless dread of an unknowable presence. Even mainstream entertainment incorporates themes of cosmic insignificance and existential displacement, often without fully grasping the philosophical depths it has begun to excavate. The influence appears in unexpected places, often filtered through creators who may not consciously acknowledge Lovecraftian sources. Films like Annihilation borrow cosmic horror's contamination mechanics. The alien shimmer transforms according to incomprehensible principles. Reality becomes unreliable. Biology follows alien rules, while maintaining human-centered resolution that ultimately reasserts agency within frameworks cosmic horror would eliminate entirely. The Ring uses mimetic transmission, ideas as contagion, though it preserves moral frameworks absent from pure cosmic horror, suggesting that transgression carries consequences within universes that notice human choices. Arrival explores language's cognitive restructuring effects, but concludes with benevolent communication rather than sanity-destroying revelation, offering cosmic contact that enhances rather than eliminates human meaning-making capacity. These adaptations demonstrate both cosmic horror's cultural power and its tendency toward domestication. Contemporary creators recognize the effectiveness of cosmic horror techniques, but often retreat from its most disturbing implications. They preserve the aesthetic while abandoning the philosophy, creating works that generate cosmic dread while maintaining anthropocentric comfort. The veil becomes translucent rather than removed, allowing glimpses of the void while promising the safety of familiar stages beneath. Academic discourse has absorbed cosmic horror concepts as well, creating scholarly frameworks for examining ideas once confined to pulp magazines. Philosophers engage seriously with cosmic pessimism, recognizing parallels between Lovecraft's literary innovations and developments in cosmology, quantum physics, and neuroscience that challenge traditional assumptions about consciousness and meaning. The weird realism movement draws explicitly on Lovecraftian themes to explore reality's potential incomprehensibility, suggesting that the universe operates according to principles that exceed human conceptual frameworks. This scholarly attention creates its own recursive contamination, perhaps the most insidious vector of all. Researchers studying cosmic horror find their work affecting their worldview in ways that mirror fictional protagonists' experiences. Systematic analysis of meaninglessness begins to erode the comfortable assumptions that make academic work feel meaningful. The intellectual curiosity that drives scholarship becomes its own pathway for existential displacement. Libraries become archives of dangerous knowledge. Conference rooms transform into chambers where forbidden concepts spread through peer review and citation networks. Internet culture provides transmission vectors operating at unprecedented speeds and scales. Online communities create collaborative interpretations extending far beyond Lovecraft's original vision. SCP Foundation entries, analog horror videos, liminal space photography, and long-form analysis videos function as contemporary grimoires, transforming genuinely disturbing insights into consumable entertainment products. These digital platforms enable rapid iteration and collaborative development, creating vast interconnected mythologies that spread cosmic horror concepts through networks designed for sharing rather than containment. Yet this popularization also demonstrates contamination's limits. The same networks that enable rapid transmission also domesticate dangerous ideas, transforming existential terror into ironic comfort. Cthulhu appears on coffee mugs, his tentacled visage softened into playful iconography. Cosmic entities become video game characters whose eldritch powers reduced to quantifiable statistics and glowing weak spots. Existential meaninglessness becomes fashionable philosophical stance rather than genuine psychological threat. The marketplace metabolizes terror, packaging dread for safe consumption. Scientific discourse shows similar contamination patterns, though scientists rarely acknowledge literary influences on their conceptual frameworks. Cosmologists and physicists working on cosmic-scale problems increasingly employ vocabulary echoing Lovecraftian themes. Dark matter, dark energy, heat death, vacuum decay. The possibility that physical constants are variables controlled by unobservable processes. While describing genuine empirical discoveries, their language often sounds remarkably similar to Lovecraft's fictional cosmology, suggesting either prescient intuition or unconscious cultural contamination. Mental health professionals report increasing cases of cosmic anxiety, existential distress specifically related to awareness of cosmic scales and humanity's insignificant position. These patients describe symptoms paralleling Lovecraftian protagonists: inability to find meaning in daily activities, overwhelming awareness of vastness, feeling insignificant beyond measure. What was once literary device has become lived psychological reality. For individuals whose consciousness cannot safely process cosmic perspectives their minds accidentally accessed. The contamination operates through recognition rather than belief, spreading among individuals who encounter cosmic horror concepts through academic study, popular entertainment, or scientific education. The mere acknowledgement that human significance might be illusory, that consciousness might be accidental, that knowledge might be contamination. These possibilities, once recognized, cannot be completely forgotten or dismissed. You experience this contamination in your own response to these ideas, feeling how analysis of cosmic horror participates in the phenomena it studies. The recognition that cosmic horror has spread beyond literature into culture, science, and psychology creates awareness that you are not simply learning about cosmic horror, but participating in its ongoing transmission. The ideas that began in Providence parlors now operate through networks that include your own consciousness, making you simultaneously observer and observed, analyst and analyzed, reader and read. This chapter traces cosmic horror's contamination of contemporary culture across literature, film, philosophy, and science. The influence appears in works that borrow cosmic elements while maintaining human-centered conclusions, and in academic discourse engaging with cosmic pessimism. Internet culture provides new transmission vectors, but also domesticates dangerous ideas into entertainment. Scientific language increasingly echoes Lovecraftian themes, while mental health professionals report cosmic anxiety symptoms paralleling fictional protagonists, suggesting these concepts describe genuine psychological phenomena rather than mere literary devices. Beneath cosmic horror's literary techniques lies a philosophical framework that challenges the deepest assumptions of human meaning-making. Lovecraft's cosmic pessimism doesn't simply suggest that life is difficult or that evil often triumphs. It reveals that concepts like good, evil, meaning, and purpose are local phenomena with no validity, beyond the narrow confines of human experience. This is not familiar darkness, but something more unsettling: the recognition that the frameworks through which consciousness organizes experience may be fundamentally incompatible with reality itself. This philosophy rests on materialist foundations that strip consciousness of assumed cosmic significance. Consciousness emerges accidentally from particular arrangements of matter and energy, representing not the universe becoming self-aware, but a brief statistical anomaly. Like foam on an ocean's surface that briefly takes shape before dissolving back into undifferentiated water, human thoughts, emotions, values, and aspirations are epiphenomena, side effects of chemical processes with no significance beyond their immediate material causes. The sense of meaning that consciousness experiences emerges from neurological processes evolved for local survival rather than cosmic comprehension. The implications extend to human achievement and history. Through systematic deflation of every source of human pride, civilizations rise and fall according to the same physical laws governing stellar formation and galactic rotation. Art, science, religion, and philosophy represent temporary patterns in matter arrangement no more cosmically significant than sand dune formations or cloud configurations. The greatest human achievements, quantum mechanics, the concept of justice, the Sistine Chapel, operate as brief arrangements of atoms that will eventually return to the cosmic dust from which they accidentally emerged. This creates the principle of existential deflation, a process through which cosmic perspective reveals fundamental meaninglessness underlying every human achievement. The greatest artworks will crumble, their beauty vanishing when materials return to constituent elements. The most profound discoveries will be forgotten when their species vanishes, insights becoming irrelevant when no minds remain to comprehend them. The most sacred religious revelations will become meaningless when stars burn out and the universe returns to cold equilibrium, leaving no consciousness to remember what humans once found holy. Individual human experience undergoes similar deflation through this lens. Love, friendship, creativity, personal growth, all experiences that give life meaning and purpose, operate as neurological responses programmed by evolutionary processes serving no cosmic purpose beyond temporary genetic propagation. The feelings may be intensely real within human context, but that context has no more universal validity than any other temporary arrangement of matter. The love that feels cosmically significant represents chemical processes that will cease when the brain generating them returns to dust. This philosophy creates the paradox of cosmic knowledge that lies at cosmic horror's psychological heart. The more completely humans understand their actual position in the universe, the less capable they become of finding meaning in experiences that make life worth living. Complete cosmic awareness would eliminate the selective attention allowing consciousness to focus on immediate experience rather than ultimate context. Knowledge that should liberate becomes contamination, destroying the capacity for the very experiences that make knowledge worthwhile. Temporal expansion deepens this pessimism by revealing cosmic insignificance of even the longest human time frames. Human moral frameworks assume actions have consequences within meaningful durations. Cosmic perspective reveals that even civilizational rise and fall, species evolution and extinction represent brief moments in processes spanning billions of years. From this expanded temporal view, differences between human good and evil become as cosmically insignificant as differences between sand grain arrangements on beaches that will themselves be ground to nothing by geological processes. The philosophy culminates in recognition of cosmic indifference rather than malevolence. The universe doesn't hate humanity. Hatred would imply humanity matters enough to merit emotional response from cosmic forces. The universe operates according to physical principles that make human existence a temporary accident, consciousness a brief anomaly, and human values a local phenomenon with no universal application. This indifference proves more disturbing than active hostility because it eliminates the comfort of cosmic attention, even negative attention. Yet this framework creates its own recursive paradox, demonstrating the inescapable nature of human perspective. If human consciousness and values are meaningless from cosmic perspective, then cosmic perspective itself emerges from the same meaningless consciousness and carries no more authority than any other human viewpoint. The recognition of cosmic meaninglessness is itself a human recognition, subject to the same limitations and irrelevance as any other product of human thought. The philosophy revealing human insignificance can only be formulated by the insignificant consciousness it describes. This paradox suggests cosmic horror's philosophical framework cannot be escaped through logical analysis, because analysis participates in the phenomena it attempts to transcend. Human consciousness cannot achieve truly cosmic perspective because consciousness remains irreducibly human, bound by the same evolutionary and material constraints that cosmic pessimism reveals as fundamentally limiting. You experience this paradox directly in your engagement with these ideas, recognizing that understanding cosmic pessimism participates in the meaninglessness it describes while simultaneously finding that recognition meaningful enough to pursue. The philosophy contaminates itself through its own comprehension, creating recursive loops where meaninglessness becomes meaningful and insignificance becomes significant through the very consciousness that recognizes its own cosmic irrelevance. The stage remains lit by the same lights it reveals as temporary. The curtain drawn back by hands it shows to be dust. The audience awakened by voices it demonstrates to be echoes in an empty theater. This chapter explores cosmic horror's philosophical foundation in materialist pessimism that reveals human meaning-making as local phenomena without cosmic validity. Consciousness is presented as accidental matter arrangement, with human achievements and experiences representing temporary patterns no more significant than natural formations. The principle of existential deflation shows all human accomplishments as meaningless from cosmic perspective, while temporal expansion reveals moral frameworks as insignificant across cosmic timescales. The philosophy culminates in cosmic indifference rather than malevolence, creating paradoxes where cosmic perspective itself emerges from the meaningless consciousness it describes. Modern creators attempting to work within cosmic horror traditions face a unique challenge. How do you generate cosmic dread in audiences already familiar with cosmic horror concepts? This recursive problem reveals both the depth of Lovecraft's cultural impact and the fundamental difficulty of recreating effects that depend on genuine philosophical disruption. The contamination has become so thorough that the very success of cosmic horror's transmission creates immunity, against its own effects, like a philosophical vaccine generated by exposure to the ideas themselves. Contemporary horror creators cannot simply ignore cosmic horror's influence because it has fundamentally altered audience expectations in irreversible ways. Viewers exposed to cosmic horror concepts become difficult to satisfy with traditional monster stories or psychological thrillers. The knowledge that horror can operate on cosmic scales makes smaller-scale threats seem diminished, like returning to children's games after experiencing adult concerns. Once consciousness has encountered the possibility of cosmic indifference, the slasher seems quaint, the haunted house merely local, the demon embarrassingly anthropomorphic. The audience has already touched the sign, already seen behind the mask, already felt the curtain move in a room with no breeze. Yet, direct imitation often produces weakened results that demonstrate how familiarity breeds not contempt, but immunity. Cosmic horror concepts that seemed revolutionary in the 1920s have become familiar through repetition. Modern audiences recognize tentacled entities, forbidden books, mad protagonists, and cosmic revelations as genre conventions rather than genuinely disturbing possibilities. The tentacle becomes logo rather than limb. The forbidden tome transforms into prop rather than portal. The cosmic revelation reduces to plot device rather than philosophical catastrophe. Familiarity creates the psychological distance that prevents effective contamination, transforming genuine existential threat into recognizable entertainment formula. Some creators attempt solutions through escalation, creating entities even more vast, incomprehensible, and indifferent than Lovecraft's originals. They propose consciousnesses spanning multiple dimensions, forces so alien that previous cosmic horrors seem comprehensible by comparison. But this approach fundamentally misunderstands cosmic horror's mechanics, which operate through subtraction rather than addition. Making entities bigger or more alien doesn't necessarily make them more effective at generating existential vertigo. The horror lies not in scale, but in recognition, not in magnitude, but in the quiet dissolution of frameworks that make magnitude meaningful. You cannot generate dread by stacking darkness. The corridor must realize you are its ornament, not its purpose. Others pursue genre hybridization, combining cosmic horror elements with science fiction, fantasy, or literary fiction to create new synthetic approaches. These hybrid works often succeed in creating interesting effects. Cosmic horror filtered through hard science fiction, urban fantasy, or literary realism, but they demonstrate the recursive nature of contemporary relationships to cosmic horror. The innovations depend upon audience familiarity with the traditions they attempt to transcend. The hybrid succeeds precisely because readers recognize what is being mixed, what is being transcended, what is being preserved. Innovation feeds on recognition, creating recursive loops where the knife that cuts new channels is sharpened on the very stones that once blocked the path. The recursion operates through cultural metabolism as well, transforming concepts through the very processes that spread them. Cosmic horror concepts that once genuinely disturbed have been absorbed into mainstream culture and transformed into sources of entertainment, humor, and even comfort. Cthulhu appears on coffee mugs, his tentacled visage softened into playful iconography. Cosmic entities become video game characters whose eldritch powers reduce to quantifiable statistics and glow in weak spots. Existential meaninglessness becomes fashionable philosophical stance rather than genuine psychological threat. This cultural processing demonstrates both cosmic horror's power and its limitations. Concepts powerful enough to spread far beyond their original context, but weakened by the same processes that demonstrate their influence. The marketplace metabolizes terror, packaging dread for safe consumption. Academic and critical analysis creates additional recursive layers that simultaneously preserve and neutralize cosmic horror's effects. Scholarly attention produces sophisticated theoretical frameworks for understanding cosmic horror's operations and significance. This analytical understanding enhances appreciation for literary and philosophical innovations, but creates psychological distance from the immediate experience of cosmic dread the works were designed to generate. The professor who can explain exactly how cosmic horror operates may be immunized against experiencing it directly. Knowledge becomes not contamination, but vaccination, understanding not transformation, but containment. Analysis clarifies technique, but risks insulating the reader from exposure, where the original text let darkness pool like water in the lungs. Criticism offers a life jacket labeled context. Technological innovation offers new possibilities, but creates new recursive problems that reveal the paradoxes of contemporary cosmic horror creation. Virtual reality systems can create immersive experiences impossible in Lovecraft's era. Direct encounters with non-Euclidean geometry that actually hurt to perceive. Cosmic entities at scales that genuinely dwarf human comprehension, psychological transformation through technological mediation. Yet these technological innovations often achieve effects by making explicit what Lovecraft achieved through suggestion and implication. This explicitness creates its own recursive challenge. The more completely cosmic horror can be represented through advanced technology, the more it becomes representable experience rather than encounter with the genuinely unrepresentable. Technology that makes cosmic horror more accessible also makes it less cosmically horrifying. The unrepresentable, once rendered perfectly in pixels and soundscapes, loses its power to contaminate through its very unrepresentability. The recursive loops operate through consciousness itself, making it impossible to achieve positions outside the phenomena being analyzed. Understanding cosmic horror's cultural impact is itself a product of the cultural contamination the understanding describes. You cannot step outside the contamination to analyze it because the capacity for analysis has been shaped by the contamination being analyzed. The observer has been observed, the analyst analyzed, the critic contaminated by the very concepts being critiqued. Your own awareness of these recursive problems makes you part of the network you are observing, another node in the spreading contagion. This creates what might be called the contemporary cosmic horror paradox. The more successfully cosmic horror concepts spread through culture, the more difficult it becomes to recreate their original effects. Success breeds familiarity. Familiarity breeds immunity, and immunity transforms genuine existential threat into consumable entertainment. The ideas that once genuinely disturbed consciousness become the ideas consciousness uses to entertain itself, creating recursive loops where cosmic horror becomes its own antidote. Yet perhaps this recursion represents cosmic horror's ultimate victory rather than defeat. The impossibility of recreating original effects demonstrates how thoroughly the concepts have contaminated contemporary consciousness. The recognition that cosmic horror cannot be easily reproduced suggests that its influence operates at levels deeper than conscious entertainment, reshaping the foundations of how consciousness relates to existence itself. The contamination has become so complete that it no longer needs direct transmission. It operates through the very frameworks contemporary consciousness uses to understand reality, meaning, and significance. The stage has turned, and you, the audience, are now part of the performance, unable to return to the comfortable ignorance that made the original contamination possible. This chapter examines the recursive problem facing contemporary cosmic horror creators, generating dread in audiences familiar with cosmic horror concepts. Direct imitation fails due to familiarity, while escalation misunderstands cosmic horror's subtractive mechanics. Genre hybridization creates effective works but depends on audience knowledge of transcended traditions. Cultural metabolism transforms disturbing concepts into entertainment, while academic analysis creates psychological distance from immediate dread. Technological innovation enables immersive experiences, but makes explicit what Lovecraft achieved through suggestion, creating new recursive challenges where representation makes the unrepresentable less horrifying. We return now to our opening question, but the circle has widened beyond comfortable recognition. What began as literary analysis has revealed itself as an exploration of consciousness, reality, and the relationship between knowledge and existence. The difference between Lovecraft's cosmic horror and modern horror operates at levels far deeper than technique or convention. It concerns fundamental assumptions about what it means to exist as conscious beings in a universe that may not have been designed for consciousness at all. The architectural difference proves decisive. Modern horror, despite its innovations and variations, remains fundamentally anthropocentric, assuming human consciousness matters enough to be threatened. Human agency carries sufficient weight to influence outcomes, and human knowledge provides adequate tools for understanding dangerous situations. These assumptions may be challenged within individual works, but they are rarely eliminated entirely. The stage remains lit, the audience seated, the performance meaningful within frameworks that preserve human significance even when threatening it. Cosmic horror eliminates these frameworks completely. It reveals human consciousness as cosmic accident, human agency as comforting illusion, and human knowledge as contamination that destroys the capacity for normal existence. The horror emerges not from external threat, but from internal recognition. The terrible awareness that everything consciousness takes for granted about its own nature and significance operates as protective delusion. The veil lifts not to reveal a different stage, but to show there was never a stage at all, only infinite darkness punctuated by brief, accidental illumination that mistakes itself for meaning. This recognition creates the cosmic horror paradox that has been operating throughout our entire exploration. The more completely we understand what makes cosmic horror different from other forms of horror, the more we participate in the processes cosmic horror describes. Knowledge that human knowledge is contamination becomes itself contamination. Awareness that human significance is illusory becomes awareness that transcends normal human categories of significance and illusion. The analysis transforms the analyzer, the understanding changes the understander, and the observer becomes part of the observed phenomenon. The exploration has revealed that this difference cannot be contained within literary boundaries. Cosmic horror concepts have contaminated contemporary culture, influencing science, philosophy, psychology, and technology. The difference is not simply between entertainment forms, but between ways of understanding what it means to exist as conscious beings in a universe operating according to principles that may be incompatible with consciousness itself. Scientists describe dark matter using language that echoes Lovecraftian themes. Philosophers engage with cosmic pessimism as legitimate worldview. Psychologists document cosmic anxiety as clinical reality. This contamination continues spreading, creating recursive loops where attempts to understand cosmic horror participate in its propagation. Academic analysis, cultural criticism, technological innovation, and popular adaptation all serve as vectors for concepts that may be too dangerous for human consciousness to process safely. Each attempt to contain or explain the phenomenon becomes another method of transmission. The grimoire disguised as scholarly article, the forbidden knowledge packaged as entertainment, the contamination spreading through the very networks designed to study it. The eternal return operates through your own experience as well. Having encountered these concepts, you cannot simply forget them or return to previous assumptions about horror's nature, reality structure, or consciousness's cosmic position. The knowledge that traditional horror operates within comfortable human-centered frameworks makes it difficult to experience such horror with the same immediacy. The awareness that cosmic horror describes actual features of reality rather than mere literary devices makes it impossible to treat cosmic horror as simple entertainment. This transformation is itself a form of cosmic horror. You have become a carrier of concepts that will continue operating within your consciousness, shaping how you understand your relationship to existence itself. The exploration that began as intellectual exercise and genre analysis has become existential contamination that will continue influencing perception long after you finish reading. The ideas have taken root in consciousness, growing according to their own alien logic, reshaping the mental landscape they inhabit. The eternal return also operates through recognition that this analysis participates in the phenomena it describes. The attempt to understand cosmic horror's difference has demonstrated that the difference cannot be understood without being experienced, and experience changes the understander in ways that make objective analysis impossible. We cannot step outside the contamination to study it because the capacity for study has been shaped by the contamination being studied. The circle closes, but closure reveals the circle was always already closed, that exploration was always already contaminated by what it sought to explore. The difference between cosmic horror and modern horror is not simply a difference between genres, but between ways of being conscious in a universe that may not accommodate consciousness at all. The recognition that human consciousness might be fundamentally incompatible with accurate perception of reality creates the ultimate cosmic horror. Not the threat of encountering something alien, but the recognition that consciousness itself is the alien, a brief, inexplicable arrangement of matter that achieved awareness just long enough to discover that awareness itself represents the most improbable and temporary accident in a universe that remains, in its deepest essence, utterly indifferent to everything we are, everything we aspire to become, and everything we fear to lose. This concluding chapter returns to the opening question while revealing how the exploration has fundamentally transformed both question and questioner. The architectural difference between cosmic and modern horror operates at philosophical levels. Lovecraft eliminated anthropocentric assumptions that make traditional horror psychologically tolerable. Understanding this difference creates the cosmic horror paradox, where comprehension participates in the contamination described. The concepts have spread beyond literature into culture, creating recursive loops where analysis propagates what it studies. The exploration transforms readers into carriers of dangerous concepts, demonstrating that cosmic horror cannot be understood without being experienced, and experience irreversibly changes the understander through the eternal return to cosmic indifference. In the end, we discover that cosmic horror's difference from modern horror is not merely literary, but ontological, a fundamental shift in how consciousness relates to existence itself. Where modern horror operates within the theater of human significance, cosmic horror reveals that the theater was always empty, the stage always dark, the audience always absent. The silence that answers our exploration is not the silence of conclusion, but of recognition. We have traced cosmic horror from its philosophical origins, through its mechanisms of transmission and contamination, witnessed its effects on individual consciousness and cultural understanding, and confronted the recursive loops that make analysis, participation, and understanding transformation. What emerges is not simply a different form of entertainment, but a different mode of being conscious in a universe that remains fundamentally alien to consciousness itself. The sensory anchors we have followed, the impossible geometries, the colors beyond spectrum, the waters that remember, the stars that spell indifference, resolve into a single, overwhelming recognition. We are alone in ways we never imagined possible. This aloneness is not the romantic isolation of the individual against society, but the cosmic isolation of consciousness against a universe that operates according to principles incompatible with consciousness. The horror lies not in what might happen to us, but in what has always already happened. We exist as brief, accidental arrangements of matter that have somehow achieved awareness of their own cosmic insignificance. The whisper, not the scream, proves most terrifying because it suggests that our deepest fears about meaninglessness, our most profound anxieties about cosmic indifference, our most desperate suspicions about human insignificance, all of these may simply be accurate perceptions temporarily filtered through evolutionary psychology designed to prevent such perceptions from paralyzing us entirely. Yet even this recognition creates its own recursive spiral. If cosmic horror accurately describes our situation, then the recognition of cosmic horror's accuracy emerges from the same cosmically insignificant consciousness it describes. The truth about meaninglessness is itself meaningful only within the local context of human meaning-making, which cosmic horror reveals as cosmically meaningless. This is perhaps the deepest difference between cosmic horror and modern horror. Modern horror can be survived, understood, and integrated into human experience without fundamentally altering the nature of that experience. Cosmic horror cannot be fully comprehended without undergoing the transformation it describes. The knowledge that consciousness is contamination contaminates consciousness. The awareness that human significance is illusory becomes awareness that transcends human categories of significance and illusion. The silence that answers is the silence of the spheres, not empty space waiting to be filled with human meaning, but space that was never empty because it was never designed to contain meaning at all. It is the silence of a universe that continues its vast, incomprehensible processes without reference to the brief flicker of consciousness that temporarily observes them. You carry this silence with you now, a form of knowledge that will continue operating whether you acknowledge it or not. A contamination that spreads through the very act of understanding what contamination means. The difference between cosmic horror and modern horror has become a difference within your own consciousness, a recognition that cannot be unrecognized, a silence that cannot be unheard. In the end, the most profound horror is not that we might encounter the alien, but that we might recognize ourselves as the alien. Brief, inexplicable arrangements of matter that achieved consciousness just long enough to discover that consciousness itself is the most improbable and temporary accident in a universe that remains, in its deepest essence, utterly and eternally indifferent to everything we are, everything we aspire to become, and everything we fear to lose. This final chapter resolves the exploration by revealing cosmic horror's ontological rather than merely literary difference from modern horror. It emphasizes the silence of cosmic indifference rather than dramatic conclusion, positioning consciousness as accidentally aware of its own cosmic insignificance. The chapter highlights recursive recognition, where understanding cosmic horror participates in the transformation it describes, creating contamination that cannot be reversed. Unlike modern horror that can be survived and integrated, cosmic horror fundamentally alters consciousness through the recognition that we may ourselves be the alien, temporary arrangements of matter, briefly aware of their own improbable existence in an eternally indifferent universe.